Hey everyone, welcome to today's edition of One Single Story. It is a Tuesday, and today we're in Psalm 27. I'm with Sheryl, Daughety, and Justin Smith today, and we're going to take a look at Psalm 27. I'll read a little bit of it. This is a Psalm of David as well, and it says, "The Lord is my light and my salvation, so why should I be afraid? The Lord is my fortress, protecting me from danger, so why should I tremble? When evil people come to devour me, when my enemies and foes attack me, they will stumble and fall. Though a mighty army surrounds me, my heart will not be afraid. Even if I am attacked, I will remain confident." Today, I want to talk about fear. Specifically, how does praise affect our fears? There is what I would consider to be a common misperception is that if we have enough of the Spirit of God and we're spiritually correct, we won't be afraid. And I don't think that's what the Scripture tells us. I don't think it tells us that there should be an absence of fear. Um, I think sometimes courage is the ability to act in spite of the fears that you have. But I do believe that Scripture tells us that we have to be careful about what place fear takes in our life. So how does praise or worship, ever how the word we want to use there, how does that affect the fears that we have in our life?
Well, I think you kind of already alluded to it. Choosing to praise in the midst of fear allows you to remember where your focus is and who's in control, that being God, over our fears, giving him a chance to prove to us that he can get us through those.
Yeah, and I think when we are praising him and reminding ourselves at the same time of how unchanging God is and how faithful he is, that our circumstances do not feel quite as dire at the time, especially if we take time to look back and see how he's provided for us in the past. In situations that felt that way at the time, but then it was over and it didn't feel like that big of a deal in your memory. But it was because God was there.
I would say most of the things, once we're out of them, don't look nearly as bad as we made them out to be ahead of time. I'm typically not a worst case scenario kind of thinker, but that's a rabbit hole that there is no end to. And in your experience, or maybe you want to talk about your own personal experience, I don't know, but in your experience, what do you think causes people's fears to become outsized, unsubstantiated, overwhelming? What causes that, and how would you encourage them to change that?
I have some interesting theories on that.
Go ahead. Answer away.
It seems to me, from the people I know in my life who are the biggest worriers and the people who seem to be the most fear driven, seem to be one of two different kinds of people. One of those people would be like a type A personality who likes to have control of situations.
Or likes to think they have control.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. A perfectionist would probably be a pretty good way to simplify it. And I think the other type of person that I seem to see who really gets driven by that is someone who has had maybe like an unstable childhood or upbringing. And so they learned to constantly live in that state of survival and fear. And even if their lives are more stable when they're older and they're Christians and they understand that, I think it's just like a defense mechanism almost to go back to like protecting yourself. And in that you just feel fear of nearly everything. And I guess part of that probably just comes from the fact that they remember that's part of who they are. Right. Having remembered what it was like to always live in that circumstance.
I tend to lean toward I do think there are just some people that are positive thinkers and some that are negative thinkers. The glass half full, the glass half empty. And I often find myself trying to, even in horrible situations, I try to still look for the positive. I'm pushing toward getting past it and finding that outcome. My wife is different, and she probably will kill me for bringing this up, but she's more of she's going to think about 800 ways it could go wrong, and playing it out to the T of this is going to happen and this is going to happen and it's going to, and I'm just, I guess
but she's a perfectionist type.
She is, and we both have that in common to an extent of being a perfectionist. So, I think it's the old adage, opposites attract. So, I try to keep her more level-headed when we start going down those roads of thinking about what's going to happen or the bad things that could come out of the circumstance. So, and then she also keeps me down out of the clouds, as she likes to say it. She says I get too overjoyed sometimes, and she's like, you need to live in the reality that this is legit. It is a bad circumstance, and we need to think about what we need to do. And sometimes I'm too extreme the other way. So,
well, my wife says one of her jobs is to keep me humble.
Yeah.
She's like,
Lord bless her.
My job is to, she's I got to bring you down to earth. You got to think through this. But I think, I don't think either assessment is wrong. I see people, I think the times we become most afraid has to do with what we're focusing on, and I think you can be too optimistic that you can't be realistic. I think there's that truth.
I can be guilty of that.
But I also believe that, you can, like I struggle as a person with people who won't even try. Like, it's just just try. Listen, like, all you got to do is try. Like,
You mean because of fear?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And it's the unknown piece that I think creates so much fear. And it could be so obvious, because what I find is people want change, but they want change that's painless, doesn't cost anything, and they know how it's going to turn out. That's the change they want.
That they can control.
That's right, that they can control.
Yeah.
That's that control piece that you were talking about. I come to the conclusion a long time ago that I had so little control. I have influence, and I can shape and I can guide, and I can drag people fast enough that they can't deviate, but so much, but you just can't control it. Like, you just don't have, you have so little control over how something is going to turn out. And so I think our desire for it to be painless and doesn't cost us anything, and we know it's going to turn out good, because there are a lot of changes you make in life, you just don't know how they're going to turn out. And then the other piece of it, because as you get toward the end of that psalm, the last verse, he talks about wait patiently for the Lord. Mm-hmm. The other time that it's easy for fear to set in, it's when something takes way longer than you thought it was going to take.
Which is like everything.
Yeah, well, most everything, that's right. This isn't going to work out. It's never going to work out. They're never going to, do whatever. If my parents knew what today would look like, they probably wouldn't have stressed so much when I was in my 20s and 30s. Mm-hmm. And I want to practice that. I do. I want to practice that. I want to think, one day it's going to turn out okay. They're going to be 50 and life's going to be fine and there's not going to be any struggles. But it ain't that easy, when they're in that space between teenager. Because I've got, we've got, none of our kids are teenagers, but they're all late 20s, early 30s. But I've got a grandson that's closing in on teenager, and you start to see those personality changes. You're like, God knows. I hope the rapture takes place because I don't know that I want to do this again, And but you're like, when is it ever going to change? When is life ever going to settle out? When is God really going to come to work? And in hindsight, you mentioned when you look back on it, you go, that wasn't so terribly bad, but it sure feels like it in the moment. And you're afraid that I'm typically, that's the weird part about it. I'm typically not afraid of the choices I make. Like, I just don't even think twice about it. But I am afraid for other people, and the choices they make, because I don't know that they can recover, and I don't know that it's going to turn out well. And what happens if their life is devastated because of this? And
especially when you see someone going through something you've already experienced.
You want it to be right. Just what happens if it don't? What happens if they? What happens if it don't? And it is the what ifs that eat us up. And in those moments of fear, how do y'all readjust? Because none of us can sit here and say we're never afraid. Like, I can think of a time, I can think of numerous times. My wife and I, we constantly have this debate about, I want to jump out of an airplane, and she's not a fan of it, I just want to do it one time because I'm an experiencer. But I can give you an example. We were with some friends out in Las Vegas, up in the stratosphere, which is it's like a Space Needle kind of thing. And on the top of it, they have three or four different rides. One is like a drop. It's not a bungee jump, but it's like a drop where it drops you. It's like 800 feet. The other one is this roller coaster that shoots you straight out off the side, like you're just going into nowhere, and then it brings you back. And then you do that 3 or 4 times, at this high speed. And it was Chris Brabble and I. We bought tickets. The girls, they wouldn't want any part of it. We bought tickets. And there's this wait. And so we're there watching it and listening to people scream and watching them freak out. And Chris said, I ain't doing it. And when he said, I ain't doing it, I was like, well, if you ain't doing it, I ain't doing it, And so we gave our ticket. They were probably $50 a piece. We gave them to somebody else and didn't do it. But the longer we stood there and watched, the more afraid we became.
Yeah, the more you thought, what if this is a one time?
That's right.
It doesn't work.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I love a roller coaster, but I remember just shaking that day and thinking, golly, And so I think all of us are afraid. So how do you handle it when you find yourself in a position that you're fearful?
So for me, the spur of the moment, or really unforeseen things that happen, like, well, I guess that's kind of like a circumstance, but so let's say a tornado, in those circumstances, I tend to completely level out, and I'm the person in the situation who's calm. What do we need to do here to survive? Everything else disappears. So that kind of stuff doesn't really seem to get me. I think the things that probably do are situations that, like you said, you don't know how is this going to turn out. Things that you just think about, they won't go away. You think about them again. You think about them too much. I think those are the things that are probably the struggles that I recognize that I have that are fear-based. And so I can give you an example. A few years ago, it was a couple of years ago, I just started having all these weird health issues. And, one doctor sent me to another, to another, to another. I mean, cardiologist, I kind of ran the gamut. And nobody could diagnose me with anything. And I still don't know what it is. But after several months of this, at some point, I thought, okay, either I have something really horrible and they're not finding it and I'm about to die, or it's a bunch of random stuff and everything's going to be fine. But I felt like,
The church is killing me.
well, perhaps. It was not long after I was on staff. I think that what I realized was one day I just sat down and I said, okay, God, I'm trusting you. And if this really is something that's horribly wrong with me, either you're going to show me and show me where to go and how to be treated, or I'm going to trust that everything's fine because I can't sit around thinking about this anymore. Like I'm going to do more detriment to my health than I am help. And that's what I chose to do. And I just felt after that day like I was free of it. You know, it didn't mean that there isn't still something possibly horribly wrong. I don't know. But I said, I can't live in this fear. You didn't make me to feel this way. So I'm going to trust that you're going to either bring it to light or take care of it, whatever it is. I think that's kind of what we have to choose to do with everything. Do your part and then trust that God has it.
I find in general that the bigger the crisis, the better I can handle myself. Typically, not always, but most of the time. It's the incidental stuff that's most likely to throw me off, you know, whether it's my attitude, you know, getting angry, saying things I shouldn't. It's incidental stuff. It's not, you know, like if it's weird. Like if one of y'all walked in and said, I don't know, I want to paint the new cross we got orange. There's semi possibility, depending on the day, if it struck me wrong, I could bite your head off about it. But if you walked in and said, I stole $50,000 from the church, what do I do? I wouldn't lose my mind. You know, like, it's not that I wouldn't deal with it. It's just that I'm not as likely to lose it, be afraid. And the same is true of decisions in my life. I can make huge decisions and not flinch. It's the small things that's probably going to cause a hiccup. I'm going to overthink them. Should I, should that have happened? And so I can relate to that. So I'm sure
I can relate in the fact that I guess admittedly I'm more of a control person than I like to admit, but oftentimes when someone else is going through something, like you said, I'm going to stay more level-headed because I'm naturally a fixer. So I want to try to think of how I can help you fix it. How can we make it better? Come up with a solution. Whereas if it's something that I'm dealing with, I probably internalize it way too long.
Yeah.
Well, when you're on the outside of it, you only see what matters.
Yeah.
Right. That's right.
When you're in the middle of it.
You're not dealing with their emotions.
Right. There's a lot of stuff that don't matter that clouds you up. And that's really what happens with fear, is a lot of things that don't matter cloud our ability to think.
Well, I don't know that it's always about things that don't matter. I think maybe when it's you just have a hard time knowing which side of that line those things fall on that are affecting your decision about that thing or whatever it may be. Is this important enough to be on the side, or should it just be on this side of maybe it doesn't matter as much as I think it does?
When we're in a spot, it's like nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Nobody's ever had it this bad. I
don't know that I think that.
No, well, I mean, because we are emotionally, we're not as emotionally charged when it's somebody else as we are when it's ours. And sometimes it is things we've just got a grip on, that we have to turn loose on. All right. Well, thank you for joining us today on this edition of One Single Story. We hope you'll be back tomorrow as we continue our conversation about the Book of Psalms.